and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be talking about the Philodendron glorious here and everything I do to keep it happy and healthy and growing these simply glorious leaves. Before I get into it though, I want to say if you're new here and you don't know me already, hi, my name is Emma and I make houseplanting content all over the internet. So if you want to follow along with my houseplanting journey and maybe learn something along the way, stick around, watch some more of my videos and subscribe to my channel. If you're not new here, thanks so much for coming back. I really appreciate it. Let's get into it. A little bit of background on the Philodendron glorious. It is actually a hybrid philodendron, meaning that it's two types of philodendrons that have been cross-pollinated to create this thing. So its parent plants are the Melanochrysum and the Gloriosum, which are two gorgeous philodendrons on their own, but combined together you kind of get the best of both worlds in a single plant. You just get all the best attributes of them both. Seeing as I cannot take care of a Melanochrysum to save my life, the fact that I can grow this one happy, healthy, and big is just a testament to that and how much easier they are to grow than the plants individually. Glorious are known for their big heart-shaped leaves, which are kind of an in-between of the Melanochrysum and the Gloriosum. They're longer than the Gloriosum and darker than the Gloriosum, but not so long and dark like the Melanochrysum. They're a good middle point. You can tell very obviously that this is the child of those two parent plants. Also, quick note, ignore the water spots on the leaves of this plant. I am currently pest treating all of my collection, so all of them have these silver fungicide spots on them. It has nothing to do with this plant. It doesn't normally have these spots on it, but it's just the reality of my collection at the minute. So ignore those. They're normally not there, and it's normally a nice, beautiful, bright, velvety green color. I personally found care on this one fairly easy. It's definitely not like a low maintenance plant that you don't need to think about ever, but I do need to care for it less frequently than some of my other plants in my collection as well. So if you're looking for something that's like very spectacular, like extremely spectacular, but on the like mid to lower maintenance side, this is a good one for you. I've also noticed they've been dropping in price quite dramatically over the past couple years. I've had this one for 2 years now. It's actually the most expensive singular plant that I've ever bought. I bought an import of this plant in February 2022 for 120 pounds, I believe. And it was only that low of a price because it was an import and I had to do the rehabilitation myself and get it acclimated to the UK and my home on my own. Whereas now you can get a smaller pot for much, much less and bring this into your home for a much more affordable cost. So that is great. I really hope that more people get the glorious because it is honestly one of my absolute favorite plants. So the more people who can have it, the better in my opinion. Light-wise, bright indirect light is suggested for these ones. Too bright direct sun can burn, scorch, and bleach the leaves, which is less than ideal. I personally have this one in a very low light spot, so normally it's living right there on my sideboard in my living room, which is about 4 or 5 meters away from a southwest facing window. So it really does not get that much light, especially seeing as we're in the UK and it is cloudy here most of the time. The light on this plant is not great naturally. I would ideally love to put it closer to my window, but I just don't have the space for that. So instead, I have a grow light in front of it. This one is in front of a Sansi grow light, like right in front. I think maybe 30 centimeters or a foot or so away from the grow light. It is a little bit too bright for it. You can see these leaves down here are a lot brighter than this one because they're closer to the grow light. And I've actually bleached the leaves of this plant so you can see where the front one is blocking this back one, and the light on there has bleached away a lot of the color of this leaf. So I think the light it's in front of is a little bit too bright or it's a little bit too close to it. But for the rest of the plant, it is absolutely fine. You can see the rest of the leaves are looking pretty solid, nice dark green. I personally don't find the Glorious to be too thirsty of a philodendron, but that being said, I also don't water this plant in the sort of normal way of watering the pot all that often. Because I have the plant on a moss pole, I tend to water it mostly through the pole rather than in the pot in the soil in the bottom, just because most of the roots for the whole plant are living inside of this pole rather than in the soil. I do occasionally water the soil if I notice that it is fully dry. I'll give it a quick like drenching, but that really is not that often. If you don't have yours on a pole and you're just watering the soil, I'd say water when it's like 75% dry. Of course, that varies from time of year depending on the environment in your home, whether it's hot, cold, where you got central heating on, are the windows open, is it humid? All of those things contribute to how fast the soil dries out. So I don't personally recommend going on a time-based system where you water every Saturday or something like that, because it will change depending on the time of year. I would definitely recommend soil dryness based system instead. You can go in with your finger or a moisture meter and check to see how dry the soil is. Typically these days I'm using my finger and just sticking it in the soil. If it's dry, I'll give it a water, but I'd much prefer on this one to water the moss pole. I tend to water this moss pole maybe every 2 or 3 days in the summer and about once a week in the winter, because sphagnum moss dries out a lot faster than soil does. And I want to be keeping it moist in order to keep these roots happy and growing, because I don't want them to die. The Glorious likes it a bit on the warmer side. Their ideal is between 18 and 30 degrees Celsius or 65 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. But honestly, that is fairly normal home temperatures. I don't think my home ever really goes too far out of that range. And so I have had no struggles with this one and temperature. Pretty much if you're comfortable in your home, then this one will be comfortable in your home as well. They also like humidity to be on the higher side, like 60 to 80% is their ideal. When this one was a lot smaller, so pretty much right after I got it, I was keeping mine in my greenhouse cabinet because that was a good high humidity for it, usually in the 60 to 80% range, and it did really like it. It has obviously outgrown that, and it has been too big for the cabinet for quite a long time. And so it's now just out in my home in regular home humidity. For me personally though, in the UK, in my home, that does err on the side of like 60–70% almost all the time. So I don't need to worry too much about boosting the humidity on this one. Actually, I don't worry about it at all. I only leave this one out. I don't have a humidifier on it. I don't have like pebble tray under it or anything. It is just out in my home. Though I do think having a moist moss pole does help the humidity stay a little bit higher, because there is almost always moisture around it. That does help. I also have it grouped with a bunch of plants, which has helped retain that humidity as well. If your home isn't as high of a humidity, I definitely would recommend investing in something like a humidifier for plants like this, especially if you have a lot of like philodendrons, anthuriums, tropical plants like that. Getting something like a humidifier for all those plants would be quite useful to bring that humidity up into like the 60 to 80% range. I personally fertilize my Glorious and all of my plants really all year round, because I have created a non-natural environment in my home. It is completely artificial with lights and heat, and humidity does that on its own. I find that my plants continue to grow year round. Like this one, it has just put out this new leaf, which is like, it's too high to even show you. It has just put out this new leaf in the depths of winter, and that's just because this is in an unnatural environment. So as long as my plants are continuing to grow, I do continue to fertilize them. If I notice that plant's growth slows or stops completely in the cooler months, I will bring the fertilizing down or stop it completely, which I definitely suggest. If your plant is gone dormant, do not fertilize it, because that's like trying to feed someone while they're asleep. It's just, it can cause issues like fertilizer burn, and it's just not worth the hassle. But if your home is like mine and you've got this artificial environment going on for it, you can definitely keep fertilizing all year round. I also fertilize this plant with every single water. And I think that might be due to the fertilizer that I use. I use liquid gold leaf fertilizer, which it is absolutely okay to use that one every single time you're watering because it's houseplant focused and doesn't cause things like root burn. You can just continue to use it and use it every time. And because I'm mostly watering through the pole, I need to fertilize quite frequently because the sphagnum moss inherently doesn't have like nutrients within it, and so if I want any of the roots within the pole to get nutrients, they need to be fertilized pretty much every time. So I do fertilize most of the waters. Sometimes if I'm lazy I forget, that's fine, but I try and fertilize more often than not. I personally recommend a houseplant focused fertilizer because they are more suited for houseplants, but if you are using an all-purpose fertilizer, definitely dilute it to its recommended houseplant solution, or you can half strength it because otherwise it can be a little bit too strong because our plants are in confined pots rather than out in like a bed of soil that can drain away and has environmental factors that can dilute the fertilizer. Because they're in their pots, these can't do that, and so you want to be using half strength instead of the full intense strength if you're using all purpose. I have this one in Monstera and Philodendron soil from Soil Ninja. It's kind of my general use houseplant soil, but this plant absolutely loves it. It's a really nice chunky mix with bark and perlite. It's got activated charcoal, worm casting, cocoa coir, all of those good things. But I also supplement it with even more bark because I am mostly watering the plant through the pole, and quite frequently I do need to be careful of overwatering my plant, and so I have extra bark for drainage in the soil in order to not let it stay too moist all the time. I don't think I have ever actually upsized the pot it is in size-wise because a lot of the root system of this plant is within the moss pole. It's not something that I've had to worry about too much. If you don't have yours on a pole, you might need to pay a bit more attention to when you are repotting the plant. And I would personally repot when the roots are coming out the bottom drainage holes of the pot, which are very important when you are repotting. Pot it in a pot with drainage holes. Unless you're like extremely experienced with watering your plant, you'll probably need to put it in something like that. So yeah, I'm not actually planning on changing this pot size anytime soon, just because I don't really need to. Though I do have it in quite a heavy cache pot outside purely for support because the plant is so large, it can't stand up on its own otherwise. So having a heavy bottomed cache pot helps this plant stay a little bit more stable. So I have actually heard that Glorious can grow crawling or creeping as well as climbing. It just depends on the environment that they're sort of in. I've personally never seen that, and I decided to put mine on a moss pole fairly early on in my journey with it. I knew I wanted to try and grow it with like huge big leaves. Like, I mean, who doesn't want these big leaves? And the best way that I have heard to do that is by putting it on a moss pole. So this one has been on a moss pole for almost 2 whole years at this point, and I have done quite a lot on it. I've chopped and extended before. I've gone through an entire like moss pole surgery with this one in order to make it a bit more of a full plant. You can go watch that video if you want. I think it is quite a fun one because I had to like kind of cut it out of the pole a little bit, which was scary, but it has absolutely loved life on the pole and done really well attaching itself to it. I do have like some garden Velcro on here holding it in, but I honestly don't even think I need them anymore. I just kind of use it at the top, especially when new growth forms, to hold the new growth into the pole and make sure that the node is in contact with the sphagnum moss. I think you can probably do other sort of substrate poles if you want it as well. I personally really like the sphagnum moss because it is what I'm used to, and though it does dry out a little bit quicker than some other things might, I just like how it ends up growing in this. That being said, I do have to be really careful not to let the sphagnum moss dry out completely. That is a problem with the sphagnum moss poles, because once sphagnum moss dries out completely, it does become hydrophobic, which is really annoying. So if I let this dry out completely, I have to go in and bring it into my shower and like rehydrate it properly and heavily, which is kind of like a multi-hour process. So I try and avoid that if I can by watering the pole fairly frequently. I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna do once this one reaches the top of this new moss pole. I'm probably going to chop and extend it, because where it is sitting on top of this sideboard here, it cannot fit any taller of a pole. So I'm either gonna have to chop and extend or find this one a whole new home. But either way, I have a little bit of time to figure that out. All of this is still available real estate for pole growing. Like for most philodendrons, propagation is super duper simple. All you need to do is get a clean pair of scissors, pruning shears, knife, and chop just below a node. A node is super important because that is where the roots are going to come out of. But once you have made that chop, especially if the plant is like quite thick stemmed, you can see how thick the stem is over here. You probably want to let that callus for a couple of hours before putting it in substrate. Let that wound heal. If it does stay open, it is more prone to like infection and bacteria getting in, and that could lead to rot. So let it callus over for a bit. Once it has scabbed up, you can put it in your propagation medium of choice, whether that be water, sphagnum moss, perlite, soil if you like propagating in that, and let the plant grow roots. Once it has grown roots, you can put it back in the bottom of the pot. You can start a whole new plant with it, put it in soil or whatever medium you want to use, pon if that's your thing. I've not actually tried this one in semi-hydro, so that is something that I can potentially explore in the future. This one has just really like soil, so I'm gonna keep it working with that. But once your propagation is ready, you can just put it into your growing medium of choice and let it go. I have found though that because my plant is on a moss pole, I can kind of skip the middle step of it growing roots, because I've tried to make sure that all of the nodes are touching the sphagnum moss and rooting into the sphagnum moss. If I cut this and I can carefully extract the roots from the moss pole, I would already have a rooted cutting. So I don't need to worry about that intermediary step of getting the cutting to root in that case. So it's just another benefit of growing it on a moss pole. Unfortunately, Philodendron glorious are toxic to humans and cats and dogs, so do try and keep these out of reach of your pets or little ones. You do not want them ingesting this, because it can lead to gastrointestinal issues, swelling, pain, all of that. I have also heard that in the sap there is something that can be a skin irritant, so be careful when you are repotting or propagating not to get that on your skin. You can wear gloves. I've personally never worn gloves when dealing with this one, and I've been absolutely fine, but I do make sure to wash my hands and all of my tools after I have used them on this. It's best practice when doing houseplants to do so in case of infection or something like that. So wash your hands after handling and you should be absolutely fine. So that is it. That is how I care for my Philodendron glorious. Genuinely one of my favorite plants in my collection. I could not imagine my home and my collection without this plant, and I am going to cherish it for as long as I possibly can. I hope this video has helped you in your growing journey or inspired you to potentially get yourself a glorious. Get yourself a glorious if you don't have one already. And yeah, enjoy the fun of this beautiful plant. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up down below. Leave a comment on other houseplants you'd like me to talk about in the future. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to keep growing.